In this tutorial, we'll be looking at adding multiple logos to the same form based on certain criteria. This is really important if your company has multiple brands and will need the logo to change based on certain criteria on the same form. It's also very important if you are fulfilling for other vendors and you need their logo to display for certain forms so that they can keep their branding. So, how do we go about doing this in eFORMz? There are really two ways, and the first way, the most common way, is also the easiest way of doing it, and that is we want to add our images directly to the project and then use conditional logic language to place them based on certain criteria in an incoming data file. So, I have my data file open here, I have my project, and it's just a basic project, basic page, blank form. And I have a really simple data file. It has multiple pages in it, so we can show what will happen based on certain criteria with our conditions. And I'll show you that right here. You can just select to the right, and you see the word changes from eFORMz to eDirect+. Select again, it'll change to Touchpoint. Select again, it'll change to eFORMz. So we can scroll back and forth there. And that'll just make it easier to see how eFORMz does this with the multiple brands. So, first things first, I want to get my images in my project before I start messing around with the data file. So to do that, we're going to need to right-click the project, select Properties, and navigate to the Images tab. And the Images tab will display. Really simple, we'll just add our project by selecting Add, and you'll find the folder that your images are in and bring them in that way. And I want to bring in all three of these images that I have here on the screen just by selecting OK. And the image scaling properties will display every time you add an image to the project. This will allow you to, of course, control the scaling and the desired width and height. It'll also let you mess around with the resolution a little bit. And I'll just accept the defaults by clicking OK for now. And I want to do this with my other two images. Select OK, add one more. Double click and select OK. So I have all three of my images in my project. Now the biggest advantage to this is that you will never have to remember where your image files are. Once the image is in the project, it's in the project for good unless you decide to manually remove it, which is also very easy. You just select the image and select the remove button here. And you can also edit the scaling after you have added the image into your project. But again, this is very beneficial if your files might be moving around a lot or the project's going to be moving around a lot. Maybe you built this project on your local workstation, you move it to your company's server. Oh no, where did all my images go? That's why we put them in the project, because they travel with the project for the life of the project, unless of course you decide to manually remove them. So let's select OK. So we have our images in our project. Obviously they're not on our form. What do we do next? We're going to need to first create a variable here of our incoming data. This string of characters, I'll make it a little bit longer so we can grab anything beyond that. Left click and drag, right click that string of characters and select Add Variable. And we can just call this variable 1 for now. And so it's going to pick up any information there. And if we scroll through our data file, it picks up our eDirect+ and it picks up our Touchpoint. So we can scroll back to our first page. So we have our data picked up, and this is going to be our key. This is going to be the key that triggers which image is going to show. So for the eFORMz information here, it's going to show the eFORMz logo. The eDirect+ information is going to show the eDirect+ logo, and for the Touchpoint string of characters, that's going to show the Touchpoint logo. So how do we do that? We have our images, we have our data being picked up. The next step is to simply place an image, right? So we can right click anywhere here in the second pane of our viewer, the bottom pane of our viewer, and navigate to Add Rule and Load Image. The Rule Properties dialog will display. We can continue calling it Rule 1, that is fine. And from the Use Variable dialog, we can select Variable 1 and select OK. And we're going to load the image from the project. And we see those images we had earlier. We'll just load our eFORMz one here for now. That'll work. Again, you can see there are other methods, files, PDF files, components. If you're using the document template in eFORMz, you can also add images from URLs. That's a very common use for HTML, emailing, for example. But we have our image from our project, so let's go ahead and select OK. And our image is going to display. But here's the problem. If we navigate over here, you'll note that the image is still displaying even though Touchpoint is showing and eDirect+ is showing. Well, we don't want that to happen. We want those logos to show for their respective data files. So we want, in the respective data file, we have eDirect+ showing, we want eDirect+ to show. We have Touchpoint showing, we want Touchpoint to show. So how do we get that to happen? Well, this is where conditions come into play here. We'll add a condition to this rule by right-clicking the rule and selecting Add and Condition. And we can just go with is equal to. So if nth occurrence of variable1, the variable we created, is equal to, we'll just type in eFORMz. If it's equal to the value eFORMz, then it's going to display the eFORMz logo. So let's select OK. And we'll note that our eFORMz logo is still showing on page 1. But if we go to page 2, it's gone. It looked for eFORMz in the data file, couldn't find it, found eDirect+ instead, so it's placing nothing. And if we go to our Touchpoint, same deal. So let's go back here. So we're showing our eFORMz logo. How then do we get our Touchpoint logo to show and our eDirect+ logo to show? Well, we're just going to have to do the same thing we did with our eFORMz logo. We're going to add or load the image through a rule and then add a condition to it. So let's go ahead and go to our second page here, eDirect+, and right-click in the bottom pane and select Add Rule, Load Image. And again, the rule properties will display. We're going to use variable1 again and select OK. And this time we will be using our eDirect+ logo, which we loaded into our project, and select OK. And there it is, our eDirect+ logo is displaying. Now obviously this is creating some trouble over here because, whoa, we have our eDirect+ logo on top of our eFORMz logo. That's a problem. And of course if we go to our Touchpoint page, it's showing here. We don't want that. So if we, let's go back there, it makes it easier to see where we are. So if we go to our rule here that we just placed, the eDirect+ image, we can right click that rule and select Add and Condition is equal to. And for any occurrence, nth occurrence of variable1, let's make it equal to eDirect+. And that makes it easy. And we'll see that our eDirect+ logo is displaying still, but if we go back a page, lo and behold, it's no longer displaying on this page where the eFORMz is being picked up. So the eFORMz logo looks for the criteria and finds eFORMz, it's placed. eDirect+ logo, it's placed on the criteria of eDirect+ being in the data file. So not to be singled out, let's finish up here with our Touchpoint logo. And we can simply do this by right-clicking, adding rule, and load image. And we will select the same variable again, select OK. And this time we'll take our Touchpoint logo and select OK. We have placed our Touchpoint logo here. And just like we did with the others, let's right-click that rule, select Add and Condition is equal to, and this time we'll put in Touchpoint. Oops, there we go. It is case sensitive, so that's actually very good to note that this is case sensitive. Whatever you put into the constant value that is going to be looking for, it has to be exactly case sensitive and exactly equal to whatever it is that is in your data file if you've chosen to make it is equal to. There are obviously a variety of other conditions that you could use and would use depending on the situation, but for this example, is equal to is fine. So we'll select OK, and there we go, logo's displaying. It's not displaying on that page, it's not displaying on that page. So we can thumb through here and just go back and forth, eFORMz, eDirect+, Touchpoint, eFORMz, eDirect+, Touchpoint. So we have our logos displaying based on certain criteria. That is one way of doing multiple brands in eFORMz and the simplest way. But the one downside to putting your images into the project is it does increase the project size. And if you're really concerned about the size of the file and space requirements, perhaps on your server, you don't want to have a bigger file, and let's say you have to put like 20 images in your project, then it might be a good idea to use something called the Translate Editor to bring in your images. Now, the Translate Editor primarily is used for translating entire data files into different languages, but it can be used to sub in various images depending on certain criteria. Alright, so we have our translation file editor open, and I've created a file called imageload.xml that I've loaded in here. And really this is more or less what you do with the translation editor. You're translating based on certain dictionaries or columns. So you have a series of rows and columns for translation, but you always have a base. Well, the base is usually the base language that you're using, but since we're going to be using the Translate Editor for images, it looks a little bit different. What we have decided to do here is we're going to use a base key, which is the criteria that will give us our image. So whatever brand name, for example, that you might be using for a certain image, that would be what you would put here in this base key. And that's really easy to do. You can simply select it and change the name, add whatever you want to it just as like that, just as such, and there you go. And you can do that down the line. So you have your base column or with your base keys in there, and we have 3 rows, one for each image, but if we note, we also have 3 columns in addition to the base column, and each one has its own name. So we have our base key, and then we have image 1, and it's called again a dictionary or a column, and you can change that name as you see fit. And the image 1 dictionary has one file in it, and it's our eFORMz image file. And we can edit that just by double clicking, and you can edit and add whatever it is you need to add. Again, the disadvantage here is that you're going to need the file name wherever the file is. That's where it's going to need to be for this to work. So if you intend on moving your files frequently, this method may not work for you. But again, this is strictly for people who just cannot have a lot of images in their projects due to the size of the file. And again, we recommend that if you're using something like 20 or 30 images in a project, that you use this method. So we have the file name here and the location where it is specified. Notice that we're using double backslashes here, even though it's on the local machine, and the reason we're doing that is because eFORMz will eat one of those backslashes. So if you're hosting the image on your server, then you have the double backslash there before the server name, you're going to need to put 3. So wherever you see a backslash, put an extra. That's a good rule when using the translation editor and image file names. Alright, so we have that, and then if we go to image 2 here, obviously you can change the dictionary name. This is going to have our eDirect plus logo file location, and then we go to image 3. This is our final column, our final dictionary name, and that's going to have our touch point, the location of our touch point image to go along with the touch point here in the base. So what you're going to need to make this work is you're going to need to find both the base value in the data file and the dictionary value in the data file. And that is what we have constructed back in the eFORMz composer. But before we take a look at the composer, we're going to need to look at something really quickly, somewhat of a maintenance behind the curtain look, and that is at our eFORMz config user file, which is an XML file that you can edit as a user. We're going to need to put something in there so that we can find this image load XML file we just created. And again, to save all this, you can just save or save as. Obviously, you can add a new row or a new column by selecting new row or new column here in the bottom left, name it. But of course, all you do to save it is just save as, and once you've done that, you can save the file name. I've decided to give it an XML extension just in case I can edit it in any other editor, and it's got the clean XML look to it. And again, all of these translation files are outputted as XML, but if they don't have the XML extension, they can't be read as XML files unless you save them as that way. So I've added the extension myself. You don't have to do it that way if you don't want to. And of course, once you save it, it's ready to go. But how do we get it into the composer? That's where that eFORMz config user XML file comes in, and we're going to take a brief look at that before we go back to the composer, and then that way we can get our translation up and running. Alright, so here is our eFORMz config user XML file, and I have it open in Notepad. And you can access this file by going to the Minisoft eFORMz 6 folder, and it'll be there. Speaking of which, to access the Translate editor, you'll need to go to Minisoft eFORMz 6 also, but you'll also need to go to the jars folder. So Minisoft eFORMz 6 jars, and there's a TranslateEditor.jar. If you double click that with Java installed on your machine, it will come up. So that's how you access the Translate editor, and this is how you access the eFORMz config user. Once this config user's up, yours probably is blank if you're following along. It'll just have the XML header and then eFORMz configuration, this tag. But inside this tag, I've put this line of code here. And if you are wanting to use Translate, I recommend you reach out to a Minisoft support representative and we can give this line of code to you. But it's basically just translator name, and you can name it. This is arbitrary. You can name it whatever you like. I've decided to name it image provider. The class is what's really important and something that you would not have access to. And maybe if you pause it, and you can write it down for yourself if you intend on it, or you can again reach out to a Minisoft support representative. File name, this is where we will specify what file that we're using to translate, and that's where that image load XML file comes into play. Whenever you save a file in the Translate file editor, you will have to put that file in whatever its location is here in this file name declaration. So that's what's going on in the config user, and this is important because you're creating the translation provider with the file, and so when we go back into the composer, we'll see that we have this new translation provider, and we have it all ready to go based on our base keys and our dictionaries. One cautionary note with the eFORMz config user, there's another file in Minisoft eFORMz 6 in that folder called eFORMz config. Do not go anywhere near that file. Do not touch that file. Do not edit that file. If it does not have the user next to it, you do not want to edit that file ever. Unless a Minisoft support representative gives you the A-OK to do it, do not do it. And again, the way you'll know that you have the wrong file is if there's a bunch of stuff in here that seems incomprehensible to you, you probably have the wrong file. However, if you just have the brief eFORMz config tag with nothing in it, or maybe one or two things in it, you probably have the right file. So, just a brief cautionary note there. Let's go ahead and get back to the eFORMz composer and take a look at how we would use the Translate editor and the composer together to give us multiple brands. Alright, so we're back in the eFORMz composer here. We've taken a look at the Translate file editor, the translation file editor, and we can access that by going to the Minisoft eFORMz 6 jars folder and the TranslateEditor.jar, the TranslateEditor.jar file is what we can double click to open that and get the Translate editor up and running. We've also taken a look at the eFORMz config user file under the Minisoft eFORMz 6 folder and added the Translate declaration to it. And of course we created a file with the Translate file editor that we shoved in there, and that has all of our base keys and our dictionary names, including the proper locations of the image files that we're going to be loading into the project here. So we have everything all ready to go. I've created a project, just a basic project, added a page, added a blank form to it, and I have created a data file that has all of our base keys and all of our dictionary names matched up on the same page together. So we see, very simply here, we see dictionary name, base key, and if you go through the file, dictionary name, base key, dictionary name, base key. So we've got it all lined up. We need to create variables for these, so let's left click and drag our dictionary name here and select Add Variable. And we will put dictionary so we will not get confused. And let's left click and drag our base key, right click and select Add Variable. We're just going to put base and select OK. So if we go through the file, we'll see everything's being picked up. So we have our dictionary, we have our base. How do we get the image into the project? How do we get this up and running? How is this working? Well, we're going to need to right click our base key variable or our base variable and select Add Function and navigate down to the Translate function and select that, and the Translate dialog box will display. That provider we created earlier, the image provider is here. There is a default component translation provider, but the image provider is the one that we've declared and that we're going to use here, and that's where that eFORMz config user XML file comes into play. The dictionary we want to use a variable because we already have our dictionary, right? And that variable is our dictionary variable. So we're going to translate our base. We're going to translate eFORMz into the eFORMz logo that's in the dictionary, image 1. We're going to translate our eDirect Plus base key, our base of eDirect Plus. We're going to translate that into the eDirect Plus logo in the image 2 dictionary. And finally, the image 3 dictionary, which has our touchpoint logo, that's going to be translated from the touchpoint declaration that's in our base column, the third row of our base column. So we'll select OK here, and we'll see, look at the variable window here. We see our dictionary is still image 1 and whatnot. It would be image 2 and image 3. But if you notice here in the variable window, as we take a look at it, the base is now a file, and it's the exact file that we had placed in the particular dictionary. So image 1 matches up to the eFORMz logo. If we scroll back and forth, image 2, it's going to match up to the eDirect Plus logo. And image 3, it's going to be our touchpoint logo. So we have successfully translated the image. We've translated the declaration, the base, into the dictionary, what was contained in the dictionary, which was the image location. And again, notice that even though we did the double backslashes, we have one backslash here, one backslash here. Again, just like we said earlier, it'll eat one of the backslashes every time. So we have our file, it's here, but we don't have any images. How do we change this? Well, we can right-click in the bottom pane of the viewer and select Add Rule, Load Image, and the Rule Properties dialog box will display. We can select the base variable and select OK. And here we will select File using the rule variable. That is what we're loading our image from. We're loading it from a file using the rule variable. And we can select OK. And there it is. We're on page 3 here, which is our image 3 dictionary with the touchpoint logo. There it is. We go back one, page 2. It's our image 2 dictionary with the base key of eDirect Plus, and we have our eDirect Plus logo. And back to page 1, we have our eFORMz logo, which matches up with our eFORMz base key in the image 1 dictionary. So this is a little bit more complicated, not quite as intuitive, but if you are using lots and lots of images for various brands, or if you're fulfilling for other brands and you're using a lot of images in the same project, this is an unconventional but effective way of using eFORMz to display multiple logos based on certain criteria.